The cameras were rolling. The audience was settled. Dr. Phil was mid-sentence when it happened. The 70-year-old man sitting across from him reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a yellowed envelope, and said 5 words that would stop everything. "I need to tell her." Dr. Phil's hand shot up. "Stop the tape." The studio went completely silent. What happened next wasn't in the script, wasn't planned by producers, and caught everyone, including Dr. Phil himself, completely off guard. This is the story of Harold Mitchell, a man who carried a secret for 50 years, and the moment that secret finally saw the light of day on national television. 3 months earlier, Harold's daughter Emma had reached out to the Dr. Phil show. Her father, she explained, had become increasingly withdrawn after her mother's death 2 years prior. He would sit in his study for hours, holding an old envelope but never opening it. He wouldn't talk about it. Wouldn't explain. Just sat there, staring at handwriting that had faded with time. The producers were intrigued but cautious. Family secrets, especially those involving the elderly, required sensitivity. But Emma was persistent. "My father is disappearing into himself," she wrote in her follow-up email. "Whatever is in that envelope is killing him. He needs help, and I think he needs to say it out loud." Dr. Phil agreed to see them. The day of the taping, Harold arrived early. Studio staff noticed he kept that envelope in his hand constantly, fingers tracing the edges like a prayer. Makeup artists tried to take it while they worked on him. He refused. "It stays with me," he said quietly. It was the first sign that this episode would be different. When Dr. Phil walked onto the stage, he immediately picked up on Harold's energy. 20 years of doing this show had given him an instinct for when someone was carrying weight that went beyond ordinary family drama. Harold wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was haunted. "Harold, your daughter Emma is worried about you," Dr. Phil began, settling into his chair. "She says you've been holding on to something since your wife passed. Can you tell me what's going on?" Harold's hands tightened around the envelope. "I loved my wife," he said, his voice steady but strained. "I want to be clear about that. Margaret was a good woman. She gave me 52 years of marriage, 3 children, and a life I never thought I deserved." Dr. Phil leaned forward slightly. But she wasn't the first woman I loved." The audience shifted. This wasn't uncommon. Many people had relationships before marriage. Dr. Phil was about to respond when Harold continued. "Her name was Catherine. We met in 1970. I was 22. She was 20. We worked at the same factory in Detroit. She had this laugh that could fill a room." Harold's eyes went distant, seeing something the cameras couldn't capture. "We fell in love fast. The kind of love that feels like drowning and flying at the same time." Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. Harold was trembling now, the envelope shaking in his grip. "We were going to get married. I'd already bought a ring. It was hidden in my apartment, waiting for the right moment." "What happened?" Dr. Phil asked, his voice gentler than usual. "Vietnam happened." Harold's voice cracked. "I got drafted. January 1971. I had 2 weeks before I had to report. Catherine begged me to marry her before I left. She said we could do it at the courthouse, didn't need anything fancy. But I said no." The audience was completely still. You could hear the soft hum of the studio lights. "I told her I wanted to do it right. Big wedding, her family there, everything perfect. I promised her I'd come back and we'd do it properly." Harold's hands were shaking harder now. "She wrote me letters every single week. 52 letters in my first year over there. I kept every one." Dr. Phil's expression had shifted. This wasn't just a story about lost love. This was something deeper. "I came home in December 1972. 23 months away. I had her last letter in my pocket. She'd written it 3 weeks before I was supposed to come back. She told me she'd already picked out her dress. Said she couldn't wait to see me." Harold stopped. The silence stretched. Dr. Phil didn't push. He knew that whatever was coming needed space to emerge on its own. When I got back to Detroit, I went straight to her apartment. Her mother answered the door. Harold's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Catherine had died 4 months earlier. Brain aneurysm. She was 24 years old. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The audience gasped. Emma, sitting in the front row, had tears streaming down her face. Dr. Phil's jaw tightened. This was the kind of loss that didn't heal, it just scarred over. Harold, I'm so sorry, Dr. Phil said, and the way he said it made it clear this wasn't just professional empathy. This was real. Her mother gave me this. Harold held up the envelope. Catherine had written it 2 days before she died. Her mother said she told her to give it to me if anything ever happened to her. I've carried it for 53 years. I've never opened it. The weight of that statement hit everyone at once. 53 years. Half a century of carrying words he'd never read. Dr. Phil sat back. Why haven't you opened it? Because once I do, that's it. It's the last thing she'll ever say to me. And I'm not ready for it to be over. The logic was heartbreaking and completely understandable. As long as that letter remained sealed, Catherine was still somehow speaking to him. Opening it would mean accepting a final goodbye he'd been avoiding for decades. Harold, you married Margaret 6 years after Catherine died. Did she know about this letter? Harold nodded slowly. She knew about Catherine. I told her on our second date that I'd loved someone before her and that she'd died. Margaret said she could live with loving a man who'd loved before, as long as I promised to love her fully while she was here. Did you? I did. I really did. Margaret was my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. But Dr. Phil, I'd be lying if I said there weren't nights I didn't think about Catherine. Didn't wonder what she wrote. Didn't imagine the life we could have had. Did Margaret know you still had the letter? Harold hesitated. No. I kept it hidden. In my study, in a locked drawer. After Margaret died, I took it out. I thought maybe it was finally time. But I couldn't do it. Dr. Phil stood up. This was the moment where most hosts would offer comfort, suggest therapy, wrap the segment. Instead, Dr. Phil walked over to Harold and sat on the edge of the coffee table directly in front of him. Harold, I need you to hear me very carefully. What you're experiencing isn't just grief. It's delayed grief layered on top of complicated grief layered on top of survivor's guilt. You've been carrying this for 5 decades, and it's not a burden you can carry to your grave. Harold's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to let her go. Opening that letter isn't letting her go. It's letting her finish what she wanted to say to you. You've been holding on to your fear of goodbye for so long that you've forgotten she had something she needed you to hear. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. Dr. Phil turned to the production booth. Cut the cameras for a minute. The audience murmured in confusion. Emma looked alarmed. The cameras kept rolling for a moment until Dr. Phil repeated firmly, I said cut them. The red recording lights went off. Dr. Phil looked back at Harold. What I'm about to say is just between you and me, but I want you to think about it. That letter has been your connection to Catherine, but it's also been your prison. You've been so afraid of losing her again that you've never let yourself truly grieve her the first time. Harold was crying now, decades of held emotion finally breaking through. You loved 2 women in your life. Both of them deserved your whole heart. Catherine got it when she was alive. Margaret got it when she was alive. But right now, you're not giving it to anyone, not even yourself. You're stuck in 1972, and Harold, you're 70 years old. You don't have another 50 years to wait. The studio was so quiet that Harold's breathing was audible. I can't do it alone, Harold whispered. Dr. Phil put his hand on Harold's shoulder. You're not alone. Your daughter is here. I'm here. And Harold, Catherine is still here too, in the words she left you. Dr. Phil stood and gestured to Emma. She rushed onto the stage and sat beside her father, taking his free hand. Dr. Phil looked at the production booth again. Bring me a letter opener, and turned the cameras back on. When the cameras resumed, the atmosphere had completely changed. This wasn't a television show anymore. This was a sacred moment that happened to be recorded. A production assistant handed Dr. Phil a simple silver letter opener. He held it for a moment, then placed it on the table between them. "Harold, I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your choice. But I want you to know that whatever is in that letter, it was written by a woman who loved you enough to make sure you'd have her words even after she was gone. That's not cruelty. That's a gift." Harold stared at the envelope. His hand stopped shaking. Emma squeezed his hand. "Dad, I'm right here." Harold picked up the letter opener. The audience held its collective breath. Slowly, carefully, Harold slid the blade under the envelope's seal. The paper was so old it barely resisted. He set down the opener and pulled out 2 pages of lined notebook paper, the handwriting faded but still legible. "Dr." Phil stood and stepped back, giving Harold space. Harold unfolded the pages. His eyes scanned the first line, and his face crumbled. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew she might not make it." Dr. Phil's expression softened with profound sadness. "Can you read it to us, or would you prefer privacy?" Harold looked at Emma, then at Dr. Phil, then out at the audience of strangers who were all crying with him. She'd want people to know. Catherine always believed love should be witnessed. He cleared his throat and began to read, his voice breaking every few words. "My dearest Harold, if you're reading this, then the headache's won. I've been having them for months, and the doctors say there's something wrong they can't fix. I didn't tell you because you have enough to worry about over there, and I didn't want you carrying this. I want you to know that every day I had with you was the best day of my life. You made me believe in the kind of love I only read about in books. I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm terrified of you blaming yourself. Promise me you won't. Promise me you'll find someone else and love her the way you loved me, fully and without holding back. I don't want to be the ghost in your future. I want to be the girl who taught you that your heart is big enough for the world. Live, Harold. Live big and live long and live happy. And when you think of me, don't be sad. Just remember that I loved you first, and that's a forever kind of thing. Yours always, Catherine." But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Harold finished reading and carefully refolded the letter. He looked at Dr. Phil with an expression that was equal parts devastation and relief. "She gave me permission," Harold said, his voice filled with wonder. "She gave me permission to love Margaret. All these years I thought I was betraying her. But she wanted me to move on." Dr. Phil nodded slowly. "Harold, the guilt you've been carrying wasn't yours to carry. Catherine released you from it 53 years ago. You just weren't ready to hear it." Emma was sobbing openly now, her head on her father's shoulder. "Dad, you're allowed to be happy. Mom would want that too." Harold looked at his daughter, then at the letter, then at Dr. Phil. "I wasted so much time." "No," Dr. Phil said firmly. "You survived the best way you knew how. But now you know better, and knowing better means you can do better. Starting today." Dr. Phil turned to the audience. "This man just showed us something most people never have the courage to do. He opened a door he'd kept locked for half a century. He faced his grief, his guilt, and his fear all at once. And he's still standing." The audience erupted in applause. Not the polite golf clap of a typical show ending, but a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Harold sat there, holding Catherine's letter in one hand and Emma's hand in the other, tears streaming down his face. Dr. Phil waited for the applause to die down, then spoke directly to the camera. "If you're watching this and you're carrying something you haven't dealt with, if you've got a letter you haven't opened or words you haven't said or grief you haven't processed, let Harold's courage inspire you. It's never too late to heal. It's never too late to let go. And it's never too late to live." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the taping ended, Dr. Phil did something he rarely does. He stayed on stage with Harold until the crew finished packing up. No cameras. No audience. Just two men talking about love, loss, and the courage it takes to finally let go. 3 months later, Emma sent the show an update. Harold had framed Catherine's letter and placed it on his study wall. He visits it every morning, reads it once, and then goes about his day. He started volunteering at a veterans center, sharing his story with other men who carry their own sealed envelopes. "My father is living again," Emma wrote. "For the first time since my mother died, he's actually living." Dr. Phil kept that email. On days when the work feels heavy, when the stories blur together, he pulls it out and remembers why he does this. Because sometimes, all it takes is one brave moment to change everything. Harold Mitchell came to that stage carrying 53 years of silence. He left carrying permission to heal. And that permission came from the one person whose voice he needed to hear most, the girl who loved him first, and who loved him enough to set him free.